What's up, guys? Welcome back to Weekly Quiz 23. This is the series where you guys get to analyze 3 positions, guess which move you would play, and then we compare that to everybody else on the channel. This week's theme, which is kind of a new thing that I've brought back, this week's theme was games from Bobby Fischer when he was 12 years old. So if you don't know who that is, Bobby Fischer was the world champion way back several years ago. Some people consider him the best player ever to play chess. Of course, that's debatable and there's a lot of different opinions, but he was definitely a strong player. When he was 12 years old, obviously wasn't at his peak, but was still, playing fairly well. And so I thought it would be interesting to compare some of, our moves with what he played when he was 12 years old. So all of 3 of these positions that we're going to look at were taken from his games. And as always, if you didn't get a chance to participate in the quiz already, you can just pause the video as we go along and do it that way. But having said that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, this week we had 346 players participate from the 0 to 1,000 range, 122 players, 160 players in the 1,000 to 1,600, and 64 players above 1,600. Let's take a look at position number 1. All right, here's position number 1. It's white to play. If you'd like to pause and figure out what move you think was the best move, go ahead and do that, and then we'll compare it to everybody else as well as what Bobby Fischer actually played in the game. All right, if you had a chance to look at that, let's go ahead and take a look. So 0 to 1,000, we had top move was knight to h5, second move was queen takes f7, third move was castle queenside. 1,000 is 1,600, again top move knight h5, castles queenside, and then queen takes f7. And above 1,600, top move was knight h5, second move was rook takes g7, and then the third move was castle queenside. All right, so the first thing I want to share with you is Bobby Fischer decided to play queen takes f7. Now, the problem with this, well, I say the problem, it's not like a terrible move, but it does give the advantage to black. Okay, so it's a slight advantage for white. As soon as you play queen takes f7, it's advantage for black. And the reason has to do with the fact that, let's think about the kings for a second. Whose king is more in danger? And the answer is black's. There's an open file here, half open file here with the rook. The king is awkwardly placed with the rook in the corner, right? Whenever that happens, it's usually not good for the king because it has less places to move and the rook is not really helping. So you put all that together, white's king is actually pretty safe. This is blocked off nicely, and you could castle if you need to get away from something in the center. And so because of that, a queen trade doesn't really benefit white, it benefits black, because then there's no more pressure on the king. You're just going into an endgame. Now, some of you might say, well, you're up a pawn. You have 6 against 5, so don't you want to go into an endgame when you're ahead a pawn? The issue is, number one, look at your pawns. They're not very nice. So even though you are up a pawn, it's going to be very difficult to actually push these forward and make use of the fact that you have an extra pawn. And also, black has the 2 bishops, which is very, very good compared to white only has 1 bishop. The bishop pair is going to be able to really control the board, especially when there's pawns on both sides of the board. And you're activating black's king and freeing the rook all at the same time. And so all of that together really just makes it not a great decision, okay? Now, some of you did say knight to h5. This is actually the best move, and there's a couple of points behind this. First of all, the queen's pinned, right? So you can't take the knight. The other point is that if you try to trade queens yourself, if you're black, you lose because there's this kind of in-between move, rook takes g7 check first, then you take back the queen, so you win another pawn. But more importantly, look at what's happening here. This is under attack. This is under attack. If the bishop moves, this is under attack. The king is still in danger. There's a threat of bishop c5. There's, the knight's actively placed. So much is happening, and it's almost +5 for white, even though it looks like just a pawn or two, +5. So very bad move for black if they try to trade queens. The other point behind this, if you try to play something like g5 or g6 to shut down the rook, there's a fork here, again taking advantage of the fact that this queen is pinned. Right? The queen cannot leave that diagonal, so you can't take the knight here, you can't take the knight here. And so you're just winning the rook there, or winning the exchange, I should say. So because of that, the only really decent move that black has here is bishop to e5 to defend. But now you can play f4, and it can't go back here again because this is still a fork, right? Both of these pieces are pinned. So black is kind of in a mess. There is a tricky line that Stockfish finds, bishop to e6, and then you have to move your queen. Bishop goes back to f6, and the game goes on. But black's king is still kind of in trouble. Queens are still on the board. There's a nice attack here, and black has to be careful, right? And I would say black's king is more in danger than white's king. So that's the best line. Not super easy to find. And so maybe, you know, Fischer was only 12. He didn't see something in that line that he didn't, or he saw something he didn't like and decided, you know what, let me just trade and go into the end game. I am up a pawn at the end of the day, but that wasn't the best decision. Let's see the other move that some of you guys mentioned. First of all, let's talk about rook takes g7, which I guess the idea is just launch an attack, maybe like bishop D, well, you can't play bishop d4, I guess castle now and bring the rook over and just go for the king. I'm not really sure. Stockfish says it doesn't work at all. There's just not a good follow-up. You know, how do you follow up after this? You don't want to trade queens, so you have to do something, but I mean, I don't even know what you play here. So rook takes g7 doesn't quite cut it. The other move, castles queenside. Oh, I have it set to where it doesn't allow me to do that. Well, we won't use Stockfish on this one. I imagine the problem with castling queenside is that black, again, can trade queens. You go into the endgame where it's kind of like, yeah, you do have the extra pawn, but your pawns are doubled and isolated, and black's king is no longer really in danger. They're just going to bring it out. Probably going to be similar to the other position, you know, where we trade queens here. So that's what's going on there. If you found knight h5, congratulations. Keep the attack up. And if you said queen takes f7, well, hey, you thought just like 12-year-old Bobby Fischer. All right, let's go ahead and jump to, oh, by the way, Stockfish does say knight h5 is the best move. Knight g6 is the next best move, which is interesting. You know, going for the rook, and after rook h7, you start pushing your pawn. Interesting line. But anyway, let's go ahead and jump to position number 2. All right, here's position number 2. Again, it is white to play. If you'd like to pause and come up with your move, go ahead and do that, and then we'll take a look. All right, if you had a chance to look at that, 0 to 1,000, top move was d takes c6. Second move was bishop to e3. Third move was f3. 1,000 to 1,600 was the exact same 3 moves. And then 1,600 and above, top move was bishop e3, then d takes c6, and then a6 was the third move. All right, so first things first, Bobby Fischer decided to play bishop to e3. So everybody who said bishop e3, you were in line with 12-year-old Fischer. The problem is that's actually a blunder. And that's why I picked this position, because the most obvious looking development move is actually a big mistake. And the point and the problem with bishop e3 is that now black's going to take here, which actually, if you look at it from the perspective of, okay, now my bishop's attacked, I have to move it, and then there's a fork, you can kind of understand. Now, some of you probably thought, well, if black takes, that's fine. I'm just going to take it either with my knight or my bishop. The issue is, check this out, black's going to capture, you're going to take back, and now there's this crazy move, bishop takes h3, which is wild. But the point is that if you take it, the rook is coming in, and you're actually getting checkmated. This is the immediate threat. None of your pieces can really stop it. You have to play king to h2, I guess, and then queen f5, again threatening to come in and checkmate you, and it's just over in a few more moves. Stockfish says you can survive 8 moves by sacrificing some random pieces, but at this point the game is just over. So going back, just to kind of summarize here, very tricky idea. And so bishop e3, actually a crucial mistake, and it's not really super easy to spot that, because initially, like in this position, that idea doesn't actually exist. So like, for example, if we did play d takes, c6, like some other people were suggesting, and black tried the same idea, well, now there's no rook f3, right? Because the knight's blocking it. So you're totally safe right up until black is able to take here, and regardless of how you take, once they trade and get their knight out of the way, now all of a sudden that idea exists. So not easy to spot at all, but it was kind of lurking in the position, and it just goes to show how quickly your king can get in danger when your pieces are kind of misplaced, right? And so bishop e3, big mistake, although don't feel bad. Like I said, Fischer fell for it as well. Best move was d takes c6. Relieving the tension, getting rid of that pawn and not allowing black to trade and open up the tactic at the same time. And so here, after something like bishop takes c6, now you can play bishop e3. There's no longer this threat. The game goes on. All right, so d takes c6. Congratulations if you did see that. Now, I don't know how many people who said d takes c6 actually saw this idea, but if you did, congratulations. The other move, I believe, was f3 and a6. So let's talk about a6. This is an interesting idea. Sometimes when there's like a pawn chain like this, instead of going for the front of the pawn chain, you can try to attack the base of it, and some interesting things can happen. So I like the idea. Stockfish just says b5, and I guess it's a little bit weird, this trade. Oh, wow. Bishop takes h3. This is the line. Yeah, I mean, okay. Slightly better for black. So interesting idea. It doesn't really do too much for white, though. Now, the other move that some people said was f3, which I actually like this move quite a bit because of the idea behind it. First of all, you're opening up the diagonal for the queen, so you're giving your queen some more options. And, you know, when black takes you, if they take you, you're activating the rook, which I also like. The one thing that I will say is you do create a long-term permanent weakness on g3, which is risky. So that's the only issue that I see with f3. Like at some point in the future, if black is able to play knight h5, knight g6, that's going to be a really big threat and very difficult to stop, right? Even like bishop d6, this pawn can move, the bishop can be involved. You have to be really careful, whereas when your pawn is here, everything is covered. You don't even have to worry about that right now. So it's a trade-off. Stockfish says it's not worth it, but it's a good idea. But just remember, whenever you move pawns around your king, you always create weaknesses. And in this case, since h3 has already been pushed, now we really have a permanent weakness on g3 that we, you know, gonna have to monitor for the rest of the game, right? Like I said, so keep that in mind. All right, like I mentioned, Stockfish says d takes c6 is the best move. King h2, queen e3 were the other moves that Stockfish liked. But yeah, that's position number 2. Let's go ahead and go to position number 3. All right, here's position number 3. If you'd like to pause, again, it's white to play. What move would you play here as white? Go ahead and take a look at that. All right, if you had a chance to do that, let's take a look. 0 to 1,000, h takes g6. Second move was e5, and the third move was b3. So all pawn moves there. 1,000 to 1,600, h takes g6, queen to b3, and then rook to d2. And then above 1,600, h takes g6, rook to h2, and e5. All right, so first of all, Fischer actually played a move in this position that I don't think anybody, well, at least not in the top 3. Nobody suggested it in any of the rating ranges as the top move. But the move c3 is what Fischer played. And, you know, first of all, let's just talk about this. There is a threat on c2, so it makes sense to do something to deal with that. Some of you guys were saying to ignore that and kind of press on with the attack, right? H takes g6 or e5. But you actually give black a very big attack if you do that. So we'll look at that in just a second. But let's talk about Fischer's move, c3. Actually, it's not very good. And what did I just mention in the last position? When you move a pawn in front of your king, you create permanent weaknesses. So what's the weakness that's created by c3? Well, it's the b3 square. And so now queen to b3, and guess what? Rook takes a3 is a big threat. Not that easy to deal with. Stockfish says you have to play rook to d4 here and just allow this, and it gets kind of crazy. But the point is that black has a very strong attack with all of these pieces right in front of your king, a nice outpost for the queen to sit at. And I mean, it's, yeah, I don't know, if you go something like this, the queen's coming in and now you're just getting mated, it looks like. And so you have to be really, really careful is the point I'm trying to make here. So on a similar note, the move e5 wasn't really great because, again, the queen's going to infiltrate and black has this crazy attack that you really have to watch out for. Now, it's not that simple. Knight takes g4 is the move. And so black has the attack, but they're also kind of defending over here. And after you trade these guys, and you can probably just take, but then there's rook to g2. And it's, I mean, this position is nuts. There's so many things to calculate. But the point is that if we go back to the beginning, the point is that white is, all right, let me just back up. In this position, white has a big advantage, +4. And the easy and simple way to keep your advantage without getting into all those complications is just to play a move like rook h2, rook d2, or queen c1. These are Stockfish's top moves. Basically, defend the weakness, okay, without creating another weakness like Fischer did. He defended the weakness, but he created another weakness with queen to b3. Stockfish is basically saying, no, just defend it with one of these rooks, or your queen even, and you don't have any more weaknesses and you're fine. So that's the easiest way to deal with this. Now, you did have to consider what happens after b4, because that looks pretty scary because you can't take or you get checkmated, right? So let's just take rook h2, for example. What happens after b4? And basically, the point is you ignore it. You ignore it. So you play, let's just say e5, and if black tries to take you, you can play b3. And I've talked about this before on the channel, but sometimes it looks really scary when your opponent's got a pawn that's pushing down, about to become a queen. But sometimes it can actually help you. And this is a good example. Like once you get that pawn there and you just put your king in the corner, that pawn is shutting down all of black's major pieces. How are they going to get to your king now? They can't, because the pawn is in the way. So that was a kind of a tricky idea, but that was kind of the point. You just allow that b4, allow him to take it, and play b3. So yeah, that was kind of the idea. Very complicated position though, and so I understand why a lot of people were saying different moves. H takes g6. The line that I was looking at was queen takes c2. You tuck your king in the corner. Black actually plays rook to b4, which is, I mean, this is the kind of move that you'll miss in a game, right? You just maybe won't consider it. But the pawn is actually pinned. Rook b4 is threatening checkmate. And yes, you can throw in a check here, but you still have to come back and defend. Queen c1. Game goes on, but it's very, very crazy. You have to be extremely careful if you're white that you don't just get checkmated to some tactic, right? So the easiest thing to do, like I mentioned, rook d2, rook h2, or queen c1. Just simply defend the weakness and remember that you had that idea of b3 allowing the pawn. A couple people did say b3 right here. The issue with that is this battery now is too strong, right? And the big difference between b3 now and b3 when I just showed you is that there's no pawn blocking these guys. And so black's coming in and it's over. It's mate in 3 from here. You have no way to stop that. All right, guys. So congratulations to those of you who did say, let's see, I think it was rook. Yeah, some people said rook h2 and some people said rook to d2, which were some of the top moves. Stockfish's top move was queen c1, but yeah, both of these were fine as well. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed that and had fun, you know, with 12-year-old Bobby Fischer's games. Check out the link in the description below for next week's quiz. I haven't decided what that's going to be just yet, what the theme is, but it'll be down there. And see you guys in the next one. Stay sharp, play smart, and take care.